each other for, what, about 6 years or something like that? I don't know how long. Victor and I are part of something called...
I feel like I know you forever.
the Ministerial Lunch Bunch. So people from various congregations around Vero Beach and further south and north who are really interested in interfaith activities and really sharing across boundaries meet once a month at the hospital in a conference room to share ideas and to kind of bridge and, you know, what I'm doing, what you're doing, what anybody else is doing. And this guy up here is the guy who started it all. This is Jack Teal, who was the pastor of our Savior Lutheran for
39 years.
57 years. Anyway, and he's been organizing this and inviting people from all faith traditions, people who are interested in actually bridging and talking to one another. So we've known each other from that for a long time, and Victor told us at one point he was writing a book, and everybody's writing a book, right? so I didn't really believe it. I got this notice, February, go to Amazon, here's the book. But there's the book. It's a book. So I said, Victor, we do book launchings at the center. Would you like to come and launch your book there? And he said, yeah, sure, that'd be fine.
Of course.
Of course. So I got the book from him. I read the book. And one of the things that I noticed as I read the book, it's a fascinating story of his life and Shahina's life. But I thought, you know, big pieces of it could be my life. You know, what you do in your life as you go through your life. It sounded very, very familiar. You know, first home, the kids, whatever. And that was the remarkable thing. There wasn't anything so extremely different about Victor and Shahina's life. I mean, I think a lot of Americans, you say, 62% of Americans have never met a Muslim. And somebody says, they just don't know they've met a Muslim. But people have this idea that Muslims are so different, and you read the book and you say, oh, that sounds pretty familiar, that sounds pretty familiar, yeah, I did that, yeah. One of the things that's especially unique about Victor and Shahina is they both came from India to go to school in Detroit, and they met there. And so they have that whole immigrant experience, which with all the culture shock and differences. And if you talk to Shahina for a little while, she'll show you the picture of the whole big family now, the kids who live in Washington and DC and wherever. But they came alone. Basically, you had your brother, yeah. And they had to adjust to a whole new culture, a whole new world, and to, you know, learn all sorts of new things. And so that's a challenge that all immigrants, I think, face. But otherwise, they're just like us, right? Yeah. So before we start tonight, I would like to take a few moments of silence to remember the scores of people who were killed or injured, maimed in Christchurch last week. So if we can just be silent for a couple of minutes and hold their families in prayer for that loss, that terrible loss that they've suffered. And peace to those families. What I didn't mention, some of the things, was that Victor had to face into the 9/11 tragedy and all the backlash that came with that, and the Pulse nightclub shooting here in Florida, and the burning of the mosque down in Fort Pierce, and some very, very hard things. He describes himself as an accidental activist, that he didn't ever wish this, but when it came up, you can't just sit around and pray. You have to do something. And so for 35 years, lots of years, Victor has been doing something to bring Muslim communities together from different countries, different national strains, and with other communities, the Christian community, the Jewish community, and has been a source for media all over the country for 2-3 decades. So Victor, I'm so happy you agreed to come. And,
thank you so much. Let me begin with the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. And let me also thank the Spiritual Care Center, Carol, for having me, and also my friend Wayne, who is videotaping. He's from Temple, Bethel, Israel, from Port St. Lucie. So it's an interfaith effort here. And I think Carol, in her introduction, as I said, pretty much explained my book. So I don't have to talk anymore. However, she did speak about the challenge of the books. Everyone is writing a book, and it is a challenge. The way it started with me, I wanted to leave a legacy. My great-grandfather had done it in his life story. It's on the internet, actually. It's my life. My great-grandfather was part of the Mughal Empire that built the Taj Mahal in India. And when the British Raj began, and he had to move to where I was born, a princely state called Hyderabad. So anyways, in my limited time, I can't get into those stories. So I said I will write a story for my grandson, who's only 71 years younger than me. He was actually born on my birthday. So that's how I started to write. Then I've been part of, in America, immigrants have stories. So I said, and then I've done things in my life as an activist. So someone said you should write about activities you have done here. Then someone said we got to preserve the history, because I'm part of a 50-year history of Islam in America. And then I had to think of my neighbors. As Carol said, we're all neighbors, we're us. So I wanted to write about my life so that my neighbors get to know me. And as she said, only 60% of the Americans know a Muslim. When I say they know a Muslim, they really know a Muslim. And they get a lot of stories from the news media. And I wanted to tell our stories. In my life story, there is a window into the life of ordinary Muslim Americans and their beliefs that are your neighbors. And my neighbors, where I live, they help me. And I talk about them in my book. For example, Betty, I will acknowledge her. Let me say just quickly a little bit about my neighbors, because that is who I wrote this book for. Betty Brinneman, for not only her encouragement, but also for patiently reading the entire initial 450-page manuscript. She's an English professor. She did the initial proofreading. And I'm not trying to scare you. The book is only 260 pages. And Charlie, her husband, she lived 2 floors above, so he used to be the courier. Take my pieces of my chapters to her, bring it back, so I give you the next one. And Dave McDough for his regular feedback, Tony and Bill Van Cleve, Jacqueline Coleman, Helen Stormer for reviewing the advanced release copy and telling me how much they loved it. I'm hoping all of you who have come here will also do the same. Barbara and George Wixney readily offer us a ride to the airport when we need one, which is a 90-minute drive, as you know, the closest one. George, Big George, her husband, my grandson, when he came, it was his first fish he ever caught with George. Lynn and Bill Spencer, Sis and Paul Hamilton, looking after a condo. I mean, I can go on. So I just wanted to say that my story, and the title of the book said, Our Muslim Neighbors. And then the byline says, Achieving the American Dream, an Immigrant's Memoir. Carol alluded to some of it, and I will get into it, but first, I got to tell you this story. I wrote this book, took me 3 years, and I got the test copy, and I dedicated my book to my wife, my partner. She helped me, but I didn't want her to know. So I went to Virginia where she was, and my daughter knew, my son-in-law knew, so I gave her the book, so she was looking through it. And son-in-law says, read the dedication part. So she turns to that page, and the first thing she says, I don't like that picture. So anyway, it was at the last stage of publications. I called the publisher up and said, you know what, Victor, this is going to delay everything. So I said, no, we got to do it. So anyways, we took a picture with my daughter's iPhone, sent it in, and I got the book finally. But you know what? I don't like my picture. I'm not going to read all 260 pages here, but Carol mentioned that I'm an accidental activist. Well, how did that come about? When I came from India, and there are a lot of funny stories, and how I had to learn to speak. Indians have this the way of talking. For example, when I landed in New York, I wanted to find where the bus station was. So I start with, sir, I'm going to Detroit. So the guy said, okay, have a good time. And he probably thought I was a panhandler because a skinny kid lugging his, beat up thing. So, but I quickly learned. So the next person I made an eye contact, I asked him, sir, where is the bus station? So they guided me there. But food was a challenge. Hamburger, I thought there was ham in it. And there was a mysterious dish called French fries. That 50 years ago, I came here in 1969. I came from a princely state. It used to be the richest state in the world at one time. After the partition of the subcontinent, the Hyderabad state was taken over by the Indian government. So anyways, so I have that story, part of my life, and I reflect back in a chapter called Passage to India. And I was talking about being an accidental activist. So I come here in this country, I go to school, meet my wife, and there's lots of stories about how I had to get used to slang. I worked at a gas station. I had enough money to last for a year. Then I got part-time permission to work. And I worked at a gas station, and a guy walks up to me, and I'm, cleaning the car windows and says, I got to pee, man. So I said, first of all, he says, where's the John? So I said, and I don't know what he's talking about. There's no John here. I go back, cleaning the car, and he's still standing there. And he said, I got to pee, man. So anyway, the big Willie, he rescued me. So there are so many stories that I mentioned about me coming to America and learning the lingo, learning the culture, and it's an interesting part of an immigrant's experience with America. Then I was in the school, and then that was in the early 70s, if you remember, not early 70s or 80s, early 80s. There used to be an ABC network show called Nightline. Ted Koppel. It's like today is one of those anchormen, maybe Wolf Blitzer. Some of you know it, but some of the younger people won't remember. And he was recounting the days our Americans were taken hostage in the Iranian embassy under false name, I say Islamic Revolution. Well, even then I wasn't affected because I thought it was Iranians, because there was no such thing as a Muslim American at that time. We are Indian Muslims, there were Pakistani Muslims, there were Arab Muslims. Among the Arab, there were Lebanese, and so forth. So, Iranians are having trouble. It didn't affect me so much. Then the next thing you know, Imam Khomeini, if you remember, declares that fatwa against the author, and that was the first experience of America with Islam. And I'm a secular guy, really. I became Muslim technically in America, because now Islam is everywhere. Every night, day 1, day 10, day 15, Ted Koppel recounted, if you remember that, our hostages. So I started to study my own faith, and then I was disgusted with what's going on. Some of these people demonstrating all over the world, and it didn't make sense to me. So I started to read about my own faith. I used to call the radio talk shows and talk to them. And I write. The first word revealed in the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad was Iqra, means read. And there's a whole chapter in the Quran called Al-Qalam, the pen. The Muslims were famous for writing and reading. If you go back, look into the history, it's the Arab Muslims who dug out the Greek philosophy, and some of the best translations are still in Arabic. And I look at today's Muslims, and Prophet Muhammad didn't go and demonstrate in Kaaba. The first 13 years was a struggle for him. If you learned a little bit about the Prophet's life. So I said, what is this going on? So I wrote an op-ed piece, and I sent it to the Detroit News and Free Press. Well, they didn't know what to think, because there's no such thing as a Muslim American, right? So they rejected it. And well, I had my business, 5-store furniture chain. I used to advertise with them. So I said, okay, well, I'll pay for it. And I want to take a quarter page ad, because I want people to know what I think, what other Muslims think, what they're not what they're hearing. You know what? How much they charged me at that time? $13,000 for a quarter page ad, less than quarter page ad. So, and I said, I protested. I said, how come it's non-profit organization? No, it's political ad. So they charged me extra, So when I got the bill, I didn't pay it for a while until, I was going to take me to collection, so I paid the bill. And then, they got involved at that time. The fact was how accidentally I got involved. And every time, I get involved, and I get pulled back in. And I'm trying to get away back to my business. For example, the Oklahoma bombing happened. Now, by that time, I had established relationships with the media, and we had started a mosque early 90s. So what do we do? So I called for a press conference, and that held back the Detroit newspapers, but nationally, the Muslims were blamed for it. It turned out to be, no one called him a Christian terrorist afterwards. One of the militia guy from Michigan. So now I got more involved with the community now. And then I had known the importance of getting to know your interfaith partners, the media, and I'm still a registered Republican, and unfortunately they call me Rhino. You know what that means, but I believe in, as a businessman, as a conservative person, you know, I believe in those values. However, I also believe that we should treat each other with respect, which is one of the problems I find these days, so many divisions in America. So, you know, I marked all these things here to talk about, but I really just don't want to keep talking about it because some of you may have questions. But quickly, what I want to do is to just go over, first of all, let me just go over the list of my chapters here. So I'll give you just a quick glimpse of it. I spoke of the accidental activist. That's my chapter 1. Liberty, Lady Liberty beckons. And I talk about my immigrant, as a new immigrant coming to this country. My namesake. See, my name is Ghalib. Can anyone pronounce Ghalib? No, I mean, I had trouble, you know, when one of my first job I got, not the first job, but 4th or 5th job when I was going to school selling vacuum cleaners. You know, people thought it's kind of opening line, punch line to a joke, but believe it or not, I sold 10,000 vacuum cleaners, over $10,000 worth of vacuum cleaner over a summer. And I found that I had to give them my different name, otherwise I'd just end up selling my name. I spent all the time trying to explain, you know, what it means and how you pronounce it, and the translation of Ghalib is Victor, and who happens to be one of famous poets in India. Yeah. Then I started the business. The name of my stores was Naked Furniture, and I have a chapter about the struggles that you go through even starting a business in this country, and became very successful. Naked Furniture, it's good furniture, don't get ideas. You know, it's solid wood furniture. Actually, we sold some of those nightstands there. So how am I doing on time, Carol?
It was unfinished furniture, basically.
Okay. So and you can finish it the way you want. When his guests, they came from Michigan, and you know, I had at least 500,000 customers go through my stores over the years, 33 years. So that's what I talk about, achieving the American dream. After much hard work, many struggles to succeed. And I have a chapter on Path of the Pen, where I talk about the importance of the pen. And I have a copy of that ad that I talked about, and I just don't have the time to read it. Then I speak of bringing us together. See, the Muslim community is so diverse, but what's going on today is kind of organically bringing us together. I just wrote an op-ed piece in the TC Palm Papers after this New Zealand event. I don't know if any of you have seen it. You know, I talk about it, the diversity, and you've seen it on TV. This man who took 50 lives, they came from every race, including the whites, right? And our community is the only community that doesn't have a majority race. You know, Martin Luther King famously said, Sunday morning is the most racially divided hour in our country. But come to our Friday prayers. It's the most united racially hour in the country. Because we have, from every part of the country, we have come to this country, to America, like all of you have come, you know, from Europe, from different parts of the Europe, or elsewhere. and settled in this country. There was a time when there used to be a Polish mosque. There used to be, and even today they have some Korean mosque and so forth. They were defined by a community, ethnic community, rather than we had that initially. We had an Indo-Pakistani community, African American community, mosque. I meant. Today we just call it a mosque, and everyone comes together to pray. So I talk about building a mosque like that, a little mosque in the suburbs, and then why we served. I served on my school board. That came as a result of the need for diversity, the need for bringing the communities together. There was a dispute in the school between a Jewish young man and an Arab kid, and I was asked to come and do something about it. So we organized an interfaith groups, and then I ran on the school board on a Muslim-Jewish ticket. And we took joint ads in the Muslim Observer and the Jewish News. So the reason we serve is because we have commonality. Her kids, my kids went to the school, same school. They were classmates. So we came together for the sake of our kids. First day of a new calendar. That's a very interesting chapter, and I talk about the timeline. I was sitting between the First Lady of Michigan and the state school superintendent when it happened. That was the last day of me serving on the Community Service Commission for 8 years. And here I'm looking forward to the good days. Here I'm honored by the governor, and hoping the more Muslims will join me. The next thing I know, and then I don't want to, again, because of the lack of time, go into that details of the chapter, but I had a time. I walk up to take my certificate that governor had given, and the plane took off from the airport. And when I sit on the chair and the plane hit it was just a dramatic thing as how things change. And that I call it the first day of a new calendar. And I went ahead to build the Interfaith Leadership Council in Michigan, and that chapter I talk about we must do more than pray. And that's the story about the Muslim, Christian, Jewish interfaith partners getting together to do a prayer service. And I stood up and I said, we need more than a prayer. Some of the people are pulling my hand down. I said, I don't talk about all that stuff. But I said, no. And some of my interfaith partners, a Baptist minister, and he has written a foreword in the book. They came to me and said, we liked what you said. And we went on and built the Interfaith Leadership Council. And I talk about, my wife and I were sitting in a restaurant, and someone looked at her hijab and asked us, are you Sunni or Shia? I said, I'm a sushi. So it's not just the interfaith, it's the intrafaith that I had to work, and I was able to bring all our imams together in Detroit. It's only in America. And it was prompted by what was happening in Iraq. You remember the bombings were going on, killing each other. Unfortunately, we started that war, and we're still suffering from these consequences. We don't have the Jeffersonian democracy in Mexico, and we want to build one in Middle East. It's just, I'm very vocal. Even at that time, I wrote op-ed pieces about it. Some people didn't like it, but so what? It's patriotic to speak up. And I have a chapter on a Muslim Republican in the age of Trump. And I've written op-ed pieces about it. You can just Google me, Victor Begg, and you'll see Treasure Coast Papers. God loves all colors. And I speak of the racism. And again, there's not enough time. I can tell you a story, and it's a common story among all our Abrahamic faiths. It's a story of creation of Adam and Eve when they were misled. And then Islam is an evolution from time of the Adam, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and the last of the Prophet Muhammad. So if you read the Quran, you're going to find all these stories in there, but there is a little bit of difference that changes the theology. For example, it wasn't Eve that misled Adam. It was the Satan who did that. And he did that because he disobeyed God because of race. He said, I'm made of fire. These guys are made of clay. And again, I'm not going to get into a theological discussion, but I deal with some of these things, and I've used the Quran extensively as well as the sayings of the Prophet, and it's not a religious book. When I first spoke to my publisher, I said, where does it fit in? Is it a story of just an immigrant story? Is it just a theological story? I mean, is there theology in it? Is this a historical story? Is it a fiction? Is it romance? What is it? So she said, you fit into many genres. And then, since I use the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet, I asked my neighbors, do I sound like I'm preaching? My daughter keeps telling me, Baba, you're preaching sometimes. So that's not my role, but she understood that I write it in a context. Okay. A passage to India. I've talked about the heralds of the future. I speak of walking along the shore. Now we're in the spiritual care center. This is where I want to read a little bit from my book. And this is the last chapter. Because since I have delved into the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet, I had to say something about my own spirituality. And then this is the last chapter. The heading of the chapter is Walking Along the Shore. We shall show them the signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. That's in Quran 41:33, 53. God is addressing us and telling us, look around you if you want to know God exists. So I walk along the shore. The poet Ghalib, my namesake, is actually also my ancestor, says in his couplet, take into one's heart the essential truth of God's reality and God's expression in all things. The poet Ghalib, in a letter of 1862, come along, walk along the shore with me. The Creator's signs are everywhere in the nature. And this is the kind of invitation I'm sure many of you will accept. And the Pew Research confirms Americans have become less religious in recent years by standard measures such as how important they say religion is to them and their frequency of religious service attendance and prayer. But at the same time, the share of people across a wide variety of religious identities, and that includes Muslims, who say they often feel a deep sense of spiritual peace and well-being, as well as deep sense of wonder about the universe, has risen. While walking along the Atlantic shore, that conclusion from Pew is easy to understand. A few steps along the sand, I feel God is close at hand. I can relate to the Creator without confining that awareness to a single word or image. Nature's language speaks to me like a second Quran. and it's part of our teaching. There are two Qurans. One is the scripture we have, and one that's in the nature. I especially love my evening walks along the ocean. Waves rush toward me and then recede into the vastness of the sea. Just as the Creator reaches out endlessly throughout our lives, how can I believe in something I cannot see? When I peer into the eastern horizon, I cannot see Africa. And yet, I know that the vast continent lies just over the horizon. Human sight is limited. I glimpse the hazy line where the heavens and the ocean meet, and I wonder, what lies beyond? What lies beneath? What lies above? God encourages us to reflect on the world's great waters. Quran, chapter 21, verse 30 states, "We made from water every living thing. Will they not then believe?" In 45:3, the Quran states, "In the heavens and the earth there is evidence for the believers. Come walk along the shore with me." If you're unfamiliar with the Quran, then you may recall these passages from the Bible. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Those are the opening words of Genesis. Right, Jay? Psalms sings of the power of nature to remind us of God. Psalms 90 begins, "Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." There are words that Muslims can join Jews and Christians in affirming. So come walk along the shore with me. So I'm closing my memoir with these words because my faith speaks of a God of the worlds with the universal presence. I'm turning to poetic lines here because my Indian roots continually call me back to poetry. My ancestor Ghalib, the poet born Mirza Asadullah Begg Khan Ghalib was his pen name, eloquently called his readers to the deepest spiritual embrace of God. To this day, the Sufi poets continue to stir my heart. They wrote ghazals or odes that contemplated human love and loss. They sought comfort in the immense beauty of God's mercy, love, and creation. I hold especially dear my copy of Ghalib's poems in the original Urdu, the language of the Bollywood. Sufi Qawwali, a form of sublimely chanted devotional poetry, stretches back more than 700 years and still moves me to tears. Every day, millions of Americans say, "I'm spiritual, not religious." They are seeking deeper truths. The centuries-old Sufi tradition sings hauntingly of that yearning, describing a profound longing for the divine. That's why I'm surprised when people tell me, "Victor, you're a moderate Muslim." I say, "No, I'm not. I'm a Muslim. I'm an observant Muslim, like most American Muslims. At the moment, our approach to the faith may seem moderate to you, because of the crazy acts of extremists who have misused the name of our faith. I go on to explain that I have been inspired by the great Sufi teachers and that I see no barriers that should prevent us from seeing Shia and Sunni Muslims as brothers and sisters. Extremism has no place in Islam. I say, the Quran says so in chapter 2, verse 143. We made you to be the community of the middle way, so that with the example of your lives, you might bear witness to the truth before all mankind. The Prophet Muhammad especially warned his followers about the dangers of extremism. He said, never be extreme regarding religion. Many nations have been destroyed before you only because of extremism in religion. So come, walk along the shore with me. I can go on. This is a little poetic. I'm going back to my roots. I try to be poetic throughout my book, but this especially, it's ending. As we walk, pay attention to the sound, the smells, and the salty taste of the breeze off the ocean. Let's rest a moment and watch the birds dart high and low above the waves. My knees need rest. You know, I have two Titanic knees. So I prefer to sit for a time on the sand and play my Native American flute, as if answering my music, a flock of small sandpipers dance back and forth on their thin legs. An especially strong wave sends them scurrying for the higher ground in search of whatever goodies the sea has served up for them. Can I have my flute, please? I don't want to lose all these things. So that you know, because everything in the book is true. No names have been changed. Right, clap.
I think that you have some questions.
Oh, hold on. I'm almost done. That's the truth of life on coastline. So I'm just going to end with what I wanted to end with. Okay, if you don't mind. Okay, this is the last part. Ghalib would understand what I'm writing here. He wanted us to truly embrace the wonders and grandeur of God's creation. In one of his longer poems, Ghalib described a debate with an angry zealot who complained about all of the injustices and evils that exist in the world. This zealot was so fed up that he prayed that God would destroy this world and everyone in it. It was a terrorist's prayer. Ghalib answers with a resounding negation. No, that idea is sacrilegious. God loves the world. God hopes that we, as the residents of this wondrous planet, will love and care for God's creation, not call for its destruction. Ghalib writes, the architect is fond of this edifice because of which there is color in life. The architect would not like it to perish and fall. Ghalib understood what I described as two Qurans. The scriptures we read and the natural word God has given us, where we can see God so clearly if only we take the time to walk, see, listen, and taste this wonderfully beautiful world. I wish I had taken the advice of my grandfather. When I spent time with him years ago, he kept telling me, by the way, he lived 105 years. I don't think I got his lifestyle. He was a very disciplined man. He was Chief Justice of his time. Anyways, he kept telling me, reading of the Quran without understanding its meaning is like reading it in a state of drunkenness. Had I heeded his advice, I might have found the spirit of my faith sooner. Thank you for walking along these shores with me. I pray that I have sought understanding in the paths I walked in this life. I pray that my story has opened your eyes a little wider as you move along your own pathways. I pray. And as my grandfather would tell me, I pray that as this story comes to an end, you depart with greater understanding. Thank you. I just doubled the time, that's all. But you didn't stop me.
No, I didn't want to stop you. Do people have questions? Would you like to ask Victor? Please, you could take some questions, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm thinking probably 9/11 was the defining moment, was it? Because before then, there were Muslims, but people didn't know much about it. But after that, Muslims just got identified with extremism and hatred and destruction. So was that, did you see that, or?
I mean,
Because I don't think people thought about Muslims until then.
It's true, but there were, they say we're 1% of the population in America. And our country and the world came together as never before.
That's true.
I remember women, neighbors wearing a hijab coming to our mosque. Bush went to the mosque. Remember that?
Yeah.
And he said Islam is a religion of peace. And everyone, cared and came together. Unfortunately, what followed was more wars, and as I said, I wrote an op-ed piece, and some people didn't like. I was hoping a country wouldn't go that way. So you're right in the sense that it brought into limelight, but we are used to sound bites. We're used to what we get from the news. But these are the same people, the Mujahideen, who were in the Reagan White House not long ago. I remember some of everyone's born, Brzezinski. You remember that name?
Yes.
And he was there in Afghanistan telling him, go kill those, those non-believers. They don't believe me. So they prepped them, they armed them, and provided them Stinger missiles, and then took the glory that the evil empire is gone, and they left them alone. Then the Iraq war started, and then we went to Saudi. I don't deal with politics in my book, but you ask a question, and that has answers to it. Where did they come from? What country did they come from? Who is our greatest ally? Our allies. We never talk about that, do we? So, it's part of our job as Muslim Americans. It's our duty as well. And one of the reasons, I want to share my story with my neighbors so that they understand where we come from, the pain that we have. And we got to deal with it. Look after what happened in New Zealand, how people came together, because we care as about each other. It doesn't matter what our faith is. Same thing when it happened in the Tree of Life massacre. And who did that? Same people, same kind of ideology was behind it. And who killed those people in the church in Charleston? African American. So yes, but but really, I mean, that's not fair. You know, I mean, I know one of our kids, Ali Taki, he went from our mosque, you know, I mentioned him. He works for the fire department as a volunteer fireman. There was one rescue worker was killed. His name is on the monument now, and initially they found his passport, they couldn't find, or found his ID, they couldn't find him. They said he was a terrorist, you know, and he died like that, people.
Have you or your wife personally felt discrimination as a Muslim?
Not me. But my wife can answer her.
Yeah, let me see. I'm not, we live in this
Why don't
condo
you come up
building
here?
in North Hutchinson Island, and we are the only Muslims in the building. And I'm on the welcoming committee, so you can see how welcoming they are to us. You know, we have potluck dinners there, and everybody gets together. And I have never felt that way. When we first moved from Michigan to this place, I thought, you know, I was a little apprehensive. I didn't know how people would react, but we found people very welcoming. So I go on my bike, ride my bike every day with my scarf on, walk, and I volunteer at the Fort Pierce Library. Anywhere I've been, I haven't found any kind of discrimination. So,
but that's not to say that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, it's happening a lot. So, I mean, we didn't experience that. My daughter never experienced it, except for one time, she was trying to get into a flight, and some guy whispered terrorist, you know, and disappeared. And she wrote a little piece afterwards that she could have talked to me, get to know me a little bit. So, but we respond. Our younger generation is particularly very, you know, I'm an accidental activist. These guys are not that accidental. We got institutions built now. We have think tanks. We got civil rights groups. We work with ADL, the Anti-Discrimination League, and we got ADC, Committee in Europe, and you know, civil rights groups. America, to me, it's like a pendulum. You know, I mean, we all have to be active. If you don't, you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. And I just got a text message, I'll show it to you, from the sergeant of the Fort Pierce Police Department. I said, I'm going to be there tomorrow at the Friday prayers. You know, my op-ed, if you have read in the papers, Google me, you'll find it. Treasure Coast papers, and I talked about that. I thanked our neighbors after this New Zealand, because that is, you know, there are lots of copycats. And that was its whole purpose. And I think the Prime Minister of New Zealand handled it so well. She didn't want to even take his name. And then people, as you see the pictures of that coming out of New Zealand, of how, oh, by the way, I had to read this thing here, and I forgot about it. This is a quick neighbor. Name is Paneha, who lives next door to the mosque. One of the two mosques, said the gunman ran out of the mosque, dropped what appeared to be a semi-automatic weapon in his driveway and fled in the neighbor's driveway. He said he then went into the mosque to try to help. Neighbor, I saw dead people everywhere. There were 3 in the hallway at the door leading into the mosque, and people inside the mosque. He said, I don't understand how anyone could do this to these people. To anyone. It's ridiculous. He said he helped about 5 people recover at his home. He said one was slightly injured. I have lived next door to this mosque for about 5 years, and the people are great. They're very friendly. He said, I just don't understand it. So these are, you know, don't call them lone wolves. It's only when these guys commit, they use their words like lone wolves, crazy guy, this and that, and the Muslim does it, 1.8 billion Muslims are responsible for it. So this is, unfortunately, and we all have responsibility. The social media is part of the problem. He was videotaping the whole thing. He wanted to send out the message, how it should be done. So, and people get messages. I'm sure you get on the internet and Muslim, I got someone from one of our interfaith partners, the subject matter said, Muslim my ass. And it went on talking about all the bad things Muslim did. She wanted me to respond, and I responded. And she said, at least you kind of took the bluster out of him. But, that's one of the things I talk about. It's person to person, it's neighbor to neighbor, that we can make change. All of us have responsibility. So to answer the question, it's a long answer, that, occasionally, we are always concerned. I know of people who have suffered as a result. Their mosque burned down here. And so has the Tree of Life Synagogue, so as the churches burned down. We're not alone in this, and we all have responsibility to counter it.
Victor?
Thank you.
I do want to say, we had an interfaith service at Community Church, was it 3 years ago?
Thanksgiving?
No, the Pulse one.
Oh, for Pulse,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
after
And
Pulse.
we had them for Thanksgiving. All the different faith traditions do what they do for Thanksgiving, and their Thanksgiving prayers and gratitude and all of that. I learned today that next Thursday night, a week from tonight, at First Presbyterian Church on Royal Palm.
We'll close on it,
I'm sorry?
Oh, you're
close
close.
it, you did that.
Oh, no,
Sound.
there? Okay.
I'm
I'm working on camera from here.
They're going to do an interfaith prayer vigil service at First Presbyterian
Yeah.
Church next Thursday night at, I think it's 7 o'clock.
I think so.
Yeah.
7, yeah.
Yeah, so if this is a way that you want to be to help build bridges, we will be doing more of these in the coming years, but there's one next week, so you can go there. Please do.
Mindy just told me that 17 faith groups responded. Think about it, how people are ready to help, ready to convey the deep, we all feel about other person. It doesn't matter where they come from. Fortunately, our country today is very divided. And we have in groups and out groups. And it's political, the charge political, when we moved here, that was one of our concerns. In Michigan, we live in a 1 acre land up on the hill. We didn't have any neighbors. Although I knew everyone, I was on the school board, I was very active. So she used to do meals and meals there. We knew people, but we didn't have neighbors, like in a condo building. So now we're moving here, a little apprehensive. And I call it a Trump building. It doesn't have a Trump name on it, but probably 70% people support Trump there.
Oh,
But the same neighbor I talked about, in the middle of the night I call them, funny thing, they'll be there to help. So we have political difference. I don't want to talk about that. I've tried it one time and I found that I shouldn't be doing it. We start communicating. And then we need to overcome those divisions. And our founding fathers struggled with things, but they didn't get on each other's throat, because we all want good for us, for our community, for our country. Who else is there in this world that could be a beacon of light in this world? You tell me. Japan, China, Russia. In India, where I come from, fortunately, they just did a survey. It's reported by the Hindustan Times. It's in the top, the country that's most bigoted towards the neighbors. The second one, you can Google it, don't take my word. Which country is most bigoted in the being designated as. The second was Jordan. You know, now you can't even think of it, and the countries that are the most accommodating is the Western world. You know, even so, we live it, and then America is the leader of the world. I mean, we have to set that example. So that's how I feel, and that's why I'm active. I can't retire here. I want to walk on the beach.
Victor, you have more copies of your book, right?
And you have copies.
With you tonight?
No. Yes, sir.
Yeah, wonderful. So if you'd like to get a copy of the book, Shahina's gonna figure out how you do that.